What could be the climax of this story? Is it the terrifying figure encountered in the mysterious abandoned building? Or the mysterious nurse that keeps appearing in the hospital? Or the creepy behavior of that strange man in the basement? Spine-chilling tales await. Subscribe now. She then turns on the light and we then see this dude sitting in a tree trying to scramble down the trunk and getting stuck on a branch. We all lose it and start screaming our heads off. This wakes a mom up who comes running down the hallway with a handgun in her hand and PJs on, and she was a single mom in the hood and it was a good thing to have. The dude manages to get down right as she gets to the glass, and this badass woman opens the glass, runs into her backyard, gun in hand, and says, "You better keep running." Eventually she comes back in and calms all of us down best that she can, while she calls the police and all of our parents too. But since we all live so close, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Most of our parents come before the police didn't, and unfortunately after that we didn't get to sleep over at our house ever again. This happened to me about 5 years ago, I think, so some details are a bit fuzzy, but I'm sharing this exactly how I remember it. So when I was in high school, I was best friends with this girl called Sarah, and I were practically inseparable. And Sarah was what you would consider the cool girl. She was charismatic, spontaneous, rebellious, confident, and incredibly beautiful. She was also somewhat of a bad influence. Though don't get me wrong, she never pressured me into doing anything that I wasn't comfortable with, i.e. drinking, smoking, older boys and all that sort of stuff. But she did bring me into some questionable situations, to say the least. But I truly loved her and cherished our friendship. She was the sister that I really never had, and I'm the oldest child and the only girl born to Eastern European immigrants. So naturally I grew up in a very strict and controlling household. I realized my parents were only like this to try and protect me. But we, feeling so caged, only made me want to venture out. More really. And this itch to be rebellious is what I think caused my lapse of judgment to agree to Sarah's plan that night. So it was a summer break between my junior and senior year of high school. Our mutual friend Riley, an amateur photographer, Sarah's Ryan and their friend Cherry and myself were all sleeping over Sarah's house, already a rare occurrence because of how strict my parents were. We were all chilling. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, on the couch just watching Ghost Adventures. When Sarah was telling us about an episode that she was watching earlier about this place called the Domes in Arizona, she was telling us how there was supposedly a satanic cult that practiced there and how we should go and check it out. But we lived South Phoenix and would be able to get there in about 45 minutes. I looked at my phone's clock and saw that it was about 10 p.m. And this war I should have objected. But I wanted to do something cool and adventurous. So I said yes. Everyone was excited and grabbed the supplies and piled into my crappy 2005 gold Honda Accord. And to get to the Domes, you need to drive in the middle of the desert. And anyone who lives in the desert knows just how creepy it can be at night. Maybe it was the dark, desolate highway. Maybe it was the realization of what we were going to do. Or maybe my guardian angel telling me that I'm a dumbass. But I started to just get really nervous about this trip. My thighs were shaking and I just had this feeling that we should not be going to this place. I tried to voice my concerns as well, but everyone said that I was being paranoid and basically just told me to shut up and drive. We finally got off the highway though and drove on a dirt road for a few miles until we pulled up to a chain link fence with a gap in it. I pulled the car around so it was facing the exit just in case we needed a speedy getaway. And as soon as I parked, Sarah, Cherry, and Ryan all jumped out and started walking through the fence. Riley hopped out too, but waited about 5 ft from the car for me, so I wouldn't have to walk alone. I was hiding everyone's valuables because my car's locking mechanism was actually broken, and all the locks need to be manually opened. Since I already had a bad feeling about this place, I opted to keep the doors unlocked just in case we needed to all get in quickly. As I was hiding their stuff, I had the sudden urge to look to my left. Across the street was a tall line of hedges, and there appeared to be a man standing in the shadows just watching me. For some reason, this didn't immediately spark terror in me. Instead, I was just kind of curious and a bit confused. I was wondering if he actually lived around the area, or if it was just a human-shaped shadow or something. But I looked at this thing for about 3 seconds until I finished what I was doing and go out to join Riley. When I got to her, I asked, "Did you see that man?" But Riley, confused, replied with, "What man?" I didn't see anybody. So in the end I just kind of shrugged it off and we started walking. You needed to walk about 1/8 of a mile on dirt to get to the domes, and if you Google Grand Domes picture should come up, but I'll describe them anyways. So there are multiple concrete domes in this center, and they vary in shape. I remember one that stood alone was UFO-shaped, while others were more circular and kind of connected. The domes appeared to be abandoned while they were being built and had been standing there for quite some time. They were made of concrete but covered in graffiti, and most of chunks of the ceiling missing, as the brutal Arizona sun had wore down so much, in fact, that they began to fall apart. When Riley and I entered one of the domes, the first thing that I noticed was just how the structures manipulated the sound. Because of their shape, sound bounced really strangely inside. You could hear noises across the room like they were right next to you, and could barely be able to hear the person right beside you. Also, it was the middle of the night in the desert. There's no light pollution out there, so the only lights that we had were the moon, our phone flashlights, and Riley's dad's police-style flashlight. And the combination of the shadows and the sounds were very disoriented, to say the least. So Riley and I were walking through these domes chatting as she took photos, until we caught up to the rest of the group. As we were walking, I could have sworn that I was hearing footsteps walking behind us on the dirt, and when we were rounding a corner, I looked back and I definitely saw a man tailing us. I saw this man multiple times throughout the night, in fact, and I would always ask Riley if she saw her or heard anything too, but she always denied it and again told me that I was just being paranoid. The longer we stayed there, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Just the weirder things became. Others started hearing footsteps echoing outside, even if we were standing still. While we were in the center of the dome, we discovered a giant pentagram drawn on the floor with bones in the middle. I'm hoping that these were just someone's lunch leftovers from their edgy picnic or something, because I don't want to think that we were standing on the remnants of some satanic ritual. But while we were looking at the pentagram, we started hearing scratching on the walls, not short and rapid scratches like an animal digging, but really long, slow scratches like something or something. Someone was trying to make its presence known at this point. Ryan and I were asking to leave because it was definitely getting to be a bit too freaky. But then, in the middle of us protesting, Cherry's face became expressionless and she slowly turned around and started walking towards the back of the room, to what appeared to be either an exit or entrance of another room, with a pony wall between us and it. As Cherry was walking in this trance-like state, Sarah was saying to her, "Don't go in there. Cherry, someone is following you. I'm telling you, don't go in there. You'll regret it," etc. But we all watched as she turned the corner and walked out of our view. It was probably only a few seconds, but it felt like we were waiting there for at least 5 minutes in anticipation. And then we all heard Cherry let out a blood-curdling scream and run straight back to us. She started telling us how she needed to leave now and she didn't want to be there anymore. I thought for a moment that she was just pulling a prank on us, but look of fear in her eyes and the trembling in her voice seemed just too genuine for that. Finally, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Everyone agreed to start walking back to the car. When we were within visuals of the car, Sarah suddenly stopped and asked me to look at her back as she lifted her shirt up, and she had 3 long red scratch marks running down the length of her back. I said to her, "Holy crap, you have scratches. Does it hurt?" And Sarah was like, "Yeah, it burned where I have scratches." I started to reply to her when she interrupted me by screaming, "Run. You don't have to tell me twice." It was start running towards my car. And as soon as I got in it, I started the car and asked if everyone was in, and they frantically said yes. "Drive now." So I started to floor it. When I heard one of them say, "Wait, Cherry's not here," I immediately stopped and backed up to find Cherry throwing a tantrum in the middle of the street. She yells at me, "No, it's cool. I'll stay here," and sits down in the middle of the street. I began to apologize and tell her to just get in the car, but she ignored me and just continued throwing a fit, yelling about how she wants to stay there and generally just being dramatic. I never did really like Cherry, and while I did feel bad about almost leaving her there like that, her throwing attention was really starting to piss me off, and I was thinking about actually leaving her ass there for being a brat. But before I could, Sarah managed to convince her to get into the car and we began to drive off. We were about a quarter-mile of the way when I saw a flashlight flickering on and off in the rearview mirror. I stopped and asked the rest of them if they saw that too. They said that they did, and Sarah wanted me to turn around and see what it was. I refused and said that I wouldn't drive us back over there, and to that Sarah replied with, "Okay, then I'll drive." In my 16-year-old brain, I thought that was a great idea. And so we switched seats and she turned around. The lights appeared to be in the same location as the opening in the fence, but as we passed we didn't see anything. We continued to drive about another quarter-mile until we saw the flashing light in the rearview mirror again. So she turned around and again we didn't see anything. When we passed, we repeated this 2 more times until I told her that I was fed up and that someone was probably just messing with us, and so we decided that we should just leave. But as we passed the entrance, she slammed the brakes and she rolled down a window, and in the shadow of the hedges, there was a man standing there just staring at us. The light from our phones were too dim to reach him, and I was asking Riley to hand me her police flashlight, but she was frozen in fear and I couldn't reach it. Sarah and Cherry were yelling at him, asking, "Hey, who are you? Were you the one with the flashlight?" And then, when he wouldn't answer, Cherry started to get aggressive with him. She started saying, "Hey, you freak. We're talking to you. What's your deal?" This next part still gives me shivers to this day. The man then took a step forward into the light so that we could see him, and in that moment we all collectively realized what he was wearing. He had on a black cloak with a hood up, and as he took another step forward, he raised his arms up to his side in a way that resembled Jesus Christ on the cross, and in the most monotone but sinister voice said, "Don't worry, guys, it's just me," and smiled. As he said this, I was drawn to a reflection of light because he was holding a knife in his left hand. I immediately started yelling at Sarah to drive and he started sprinting towards the car. She floored him, as she did in the rearview mirror. We saw about 10 people run out of the hedges and the fence line towards our car. We were all looking back, screaming our heads off. Then when we turned onto the highway, we all eventually calmed down, but after that nobody spoke. When we reached the nearest gas station, Sarah asked to switch and I drove the rest of the way back to her house. Sarah and Cherry went to sleep upstairs in their bedroom. Cherry had actually been kicked out of a house and was temporarily living with Sarah, and they shared a room and the bed in the room as well. Ryan and Riley, and I slept on the big L-shaped couch downstairs in the living room, and I was obviously still spooked, but said a prayer, and eventually I just fell asleep. And the next day, when I went home, everything was normal. About a week later, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I got a text from Sarah to meet up. She had dropped out of school the previous semester to get a GED instead, and since I was in AP classes, it wasn't uncommon for me to not see her a week. That evening, She came over to my house and she just looked awful. Her hair was greasy. Her eyes looked tired and bloodshot. And I knew immediately that something was up. I brought her up to my room and asked her what was wrong. And she immediately started crying and told me about the past week. She said that night at the dome's adventure. And every night since then she's had this same nightmare. She's looking down at herself, sleeping from the corner of the bedroom ceiling. When this demon begins to crawl out of a closet, apparently it has the head of a ram, but the body of a man with no genitalia. It crawls toward her bed and it moves as if every bone in its body is kind of broken. She's filled with absolute dread, as all she can do is watch it climbs onto her bed and breathes heavily over her unconscious body. And at this point she's so terrified that a single tear drops down onto the beast. The exact moment that the tear makes contact with this creature, its head turns 180 and it makes eye contact with her. And then she immediately wakes up from the dream and begins sobbing. It even got to the point where she was trying to pull an all-in but always ended up passing out from exhaustion. And that morning she had begun to share her experiences with Cherry. When Cherry began to shake and cry as well, Sarah was confused until Cherry said, "I've been having that exact same dream every night too." After that, everything seemed to settle down and we eventually lost contact. But I'll never forget that night at the domes and everything that happened. This happened in my first year at uni Australia. I was moving out of home for the first time, and I think this made me very naive in this situation. At 20 and female. So I have a cheap place in the city near my workplace for uni at the time, $150 per week for a room in the storehouse. Only 20 minutes out from the CBD. It seemed like an awesome deal to me, and I messaged to the landlord and told her that I was interested before she gave me time to come and inspect the place. She seemed overly interested in my ethnic background. I'm half Ethiopian, so I definitely don't look white, but when I told her that I'm Australian, she suddenly became kind of withdrawn. I thought it was strange. I mean, maybe she thought that I was lying because she had seen my profile photo on Flatmates. Come on. So I explained my background. She seemed satisfied with my answer, and so he organized time for me to come and see the room. So Denise showed me around and talked as if the place was already mine, which I thought was exciting. But there was a main house with 5 bedrooms, a caravan on the side and a granny flat behind it with 3 bedrooms, which is where I would be moving in. The main house and the caravan were full 7 people living there, but only one of the rooms in the granny flat was actually occupied. It was nice, me enough considering, and very clean. A weekly cleaner was included in the rent price as well as weekly maintenance. I didn't think to ask what that meant, because I was already pretty set at moving in. But I met the people who would go on to be my housemates. All of them were foreigners, mostly Chinese or South Korean, who had come to study. I still didn't find this odd. I mean, there are plenty of international students here. The door to my room had a lock on it, and I was told only myself and Denise had a key. But Denise never usually came to the house, so there was a nice level of privacy. So a week after I moved in, I met the maintenance guy. Patrick, he seemed to be gardening and came over to introduce himself, seemed nice enough. And I found out that he's Denise's brother. He looked to be out in his late 40s or so, and I found him to be a little bit awkward, but I'd been raised to be polite, to a fault. So I ended up talking to him for a long time before going back to my room. I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember he kept saying things like I was very beautiful and describing my skin as exotic and caramel more than once, which kind of rubbed me the wrong way. If I'm being honest, a few days later the cleaner comes also. She's super lovely and has known Denise and Patrick for a long time. She and I had nice chats, and for some reason she brought up that Patrick was on the autism spectrum. So to me, that explained his awkwardness, and I realized that he's harmless. So I felt bad about my initial judgment of him. The next time that I saw him, I came out into the kitchen and saw him standing there. This struck me as odd because, 1, it was the morning I was in my pajamas and just woken up. 2, he's the maintenance guy. I didn't understand why he should be inside, but I felt bad, So I just smiled and I said, "Get her." He turned and seemed startled, but explained to me that he was just taking out the trash. I saw that he had actually replaced the bins in the kitchen. So I was just like, okay. He was just trying to be nice, I guess. But I told him that he really didn't have to do that. He just kind of insisted. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And I was, like me, all right, whatever. I ended up talking to him again and again. He seemed to have a weird fixation with me being exotic, even though I told him that I was born in Australia. But mostly, he was just generally asking how I was finding the place. And he reiterated that everything was super safe and for some reason brought up the keys to the bedrooms. He said on to me, "Denise," and they had keys. I didn't say anything out loud, but in my head I thought, wait, since when does he have a key? But in the end I still just kind of brushed it off. We get you a few months later. I work about for 6 days a week casual, as well as going to UNF for days. So I'm rarely there during the day and I lock my bedroom door before leaving every day. I don't remember exactly what time of the year this would have been, but it was colder and I hadn't used the ceiling fan in my room for a while. I got home, unlocked my bedroom door and I noticed that the ceiling fan was on. This struck me as odd immediately, because I knew that I hadn't turned it on in like forever. I was very confused and thought that I turned it on while leaving or something, and just didn't remember. Maybe I brought it up with my roommate and she just kind of shrugged it off and said that's odd, but did seem weirded out by it. So I figured that I was just overthinking it. But note that I kept to myself a lot, wasn't close to any of my roommates, and only talked to this woman occasionally. So a few weeks later I'm leaving for work, and I have a very strange feeling while walking to the front gate of the house. For some reason, I turn around and I see Patrick hiding behind some bushes, staring at me. As soon as he's caught, he turns and pretends to be gardening. In the moment my mind actually went kind of blank. I was like, surely he wasn't just watching me, right? All I did was frown and kind of wonder to myself why he would stare at me like that and then pretend that he hadn't been. I come back later in the day. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Unlock my door. Walk in and again something is just off. But this time I can't put my finger on it. I stand in my room looking around staring at everything in the room. But I can't find anything. When I realize that I don't know what I'm looking for, I feel creeped out. And I just leave the room and tell my roommate again that I thought someone had been in my room. But this time she sat down with me and basically said that she thought someone went into her room. Recently too, we chatted and she said that she left her bedroom window open when she went to work. And when she came home it was shut. I brought up the fan again and my roommate said that maybe we should let Denise know. So I texted Denise and said something along the lines of, I think someone's going into my room because of X and Y events. And my roommate said the same thing. I exchanged a few messages with Denise, but the general response from her was just, oh wow, that's so bizarre again. Being super naive and young and way too polite for my own good, I assumed that I was just overreacting and didn't want to seem like a bad tenant. Thankfully, it turns out, Denise was more sympathetic than I realized, because she said that she was going to have the locks changed the next day. I was like, great, thanks, and assumed that would be it. But in my head I was thinking only 3 people have the keys, me, Denise and Patrick. So if someone had been coming in, wouldn't it have had to have been one of the 3 of us? Which is why I didn't feel good. When Patrick showed up the next day to change the lock, himself being the maintenance guy, and all I ended up leaving while he did the change, got a text later saying that it was done and new keys were in the mailbox. Fast forward now, and I'd now been at this place for nearly a year by now. I was aware that Patrick seemed to come over about twice a week and he always came inside the house to take out the rubbish but never seemed to really do maintenance work. I chalked it up to Denise giving him a job because maybe he couldn't find one elsewhere, and I tried to avoid him. As far as I remember, nothing else seemed strange until now, and I came home from work again and walked into my bedroom while I'm getting my clothes to shower. I noticed something very strange that was definitely not there. When I left, there was some whitish, pale gum kind of splattered upwards on the wall and the floor. Honestly, my first thought when looking at it after a while was like, that looks like DUT glaze or something. I leaned closer to it but still didn't really register what the stuff was. Only that I definitely didn't spill anything at all in here. So again I got creeped. Went to the kitchen, grabbed the chucks and wiped it up. When I had the thought like, wait, is that I really didn't know what to look for. But as soon as I had that thought, nothing could convince me otherwise. And again my door had been locked. Only myself, Denise and Patrick had keys. My roommate wasn't home, but I called Denise right away. She didn't answer. So instead I messaged her and said basically someone had been in my room and there was some weird stuff splattered on the wall. I wanted to see if she came to the same conclusion that I did, but her response this time was really off. She messaged me back hours later and was dismissive. Said something like, yeah, very bizarre. The lock has been changed. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And I was like, yeah, obviously. So who do you think would have been in there? I felt so weird and kind of grossed out that I went to a friend's place and messaged my stepdad about it. I told him everything for the first time too. And I guess that it sounds a lot worse all at once. Because his response was, hell no, you're moving out there. I called Denise and I told her that I was moving out if the issue wasn't taken seriously. And this is when I realized that the leasing situation at this place was really dodgy, which I didn't know beforehand due to lack of experience and no sense to ask. But essentially there was no record of me actually being a tenant, and I was just kind of sending money into this lady's bank account. But there wasn't any official paperwork. I looked back over the stuff that I had signed when I initially moved in, and it was actually typed up by Denise. I don't remember details, but it wasn't official at all, and again super naive and young. So I was able to move out ASAP. Denise didn't put up a fuss about the short notice, and when I came back the next day, the stuff on the wall was gone, so I didn't have any proof of what actually happened. But that at least just kind of confirmed to me that something weird was going on with Denise and Patrick. My stepdad helped me take all my stuff out. I didn't have much. Denise just left a message and said please leave the keys on the counter, and it took me a few weeks to process every creepy thing that happened throughout my stay there and put it all together as a kind of a massive creep fest. My roommate left soon after that as well. And months later she actually messaged me to say that one of the old housemates told her that the police were called to the place and they don't know why or what happened. But I suspect that it wasn't for the tenants. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I'll never forget the feeling deep in my chest both that night and then next morning, when the true nature of the situation became apparent. So it was late December, in a small Texas town. We had just received 5 inches of snow earlier in the day. I can't remember what time it was, and all I remember was it was dark out. I was playing in my room. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And it's important to note that my room was made up of 2 rooms, my mud room with a door leading out to the front, then my actual bedroom. The door was an old style wood door with all the old hardware, and had a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the frontmost, with my parents' room being in the back of the house as well, so I was in my mud row playing with my Hot Wheels. When I felt something weird, like someone was watching me, I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I stared, looking for any reason to feel unsafe and run. But after a while I was sure that there was nothing. So I went back to playing a few minutes later. I got that feeling again. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And this time I didn't look at the door, but instead moved to where my back was now at the door, and I was just hoping that it was all on my head. Just then the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door like the doorknob was being touched. I was still turned around back facing the door. I was completely frozen at the metal-on-metal sound of the doorknob. It was definitely moving. I didn't know how or why, but it was moving slowly, testing the lock. I wanted to move, but I was frozen. It was honestly like someone just glued every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents had been in their shower all the way at the back of the house, leaving me at the front all alone, with the only room lit up being mine. Suddenly, the doorknob was not being gently moved and someone was turning it with force. Now this door was one that had been locked with a skeleton key, so the knob could turn and open freely. Luckily, there was a dead bee. And whoever was on the other side just figured out that the knob was free to open. As soon as I heard the knob turn all the way, I sprung up to the wall, about 5 feet from the door, my back to the wall. The door fell silent and I found myself glued on the wall, unable to move. Then the knob turned slowly and I remember watching, just waiting for it to turn all the way. And when it did, whoever was on the other side started to try and budge the door and pry it open. And at first it was easy going, but then they started pounding into the door with their foot and they got only to kicks in. When my unfrozen screamed for my life, I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked what was wrong and I told them that someone was trying to break in. They immediately ran and checked, not bothering to look outside, which I pleaded them to go and check outside. And they just said that my imagination was running wild and it must have been an animal or the old age of the house. They took one final look in my mud row, not bothering to investigate any further, and then I was just told to go to bed. It took me hours and I don't even remember falling asleep. All I remember is staring at the door from my bed, never taking my eyes off the dawn. Suddenly, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I was woken up by my parents, who were obviously distressed and seemed to be scared. My mom grabbed me by both shoulders and got right in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought someone tried to break in. When I told them this time, they actually seemed to listen. I was really worried how serious they were, as they asked me about everything. But when I was done, they said that they had to go show me something. And they took me to the front door and out to the front yard and pointed to my door near the driveway. And when I looked, you could clearly see boot prints in the snow walking along the street through our yard and straight to my window than my mud road or I'd been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever really came from it and I was never able to sleep well in that house again. I can never forget what it felt like as a child to go through this and to not have my parents believe me like that. I'm just glad that I wasn't home alone and very thankful for those dead BS. So I was working at this hospital called Warren General in Warren, PA, about 19 minutes east of Erie, PA. I worked night shift. I'm a traveler and so this was one of those hospitals that I traveled to. But one night my floor was slow, so I pulled down to the CCU to work. And well, that night my patient rang the call bell at 3:00 in the morning, and she asked me what does she want. I said, what do you mean? And she said the nurse that keeps coming in here and standing there, in that corner, and she points to the corner behind the door. So I was like, who? Ashley, the nurse that I was working with, and I pointed to her. She was sitting at the nurse's station on the computer and she says no. This happened while I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Well, there was no other one and it was just us two. Just FYI too. The patient was a woman in her 50s and didn't have history of mental illness and was not taking any meds that would make her hallucinate or anything. So in the end I just kind of laughed it off and I was just like, it's just us, and she just stares at me. So I say, okay, if she does it again, just yell for me. All right, and I'll come right in. Her room was about 8 ft in front of the nurse station, so it wasn't far to get to. About a half hour goes by. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. And she yelled, "See, there you go again." I got up, started walking, and I hear the bathroom door shut. It had definitely been cracked open just a little bit to give the dark room a little bit of light. And I walked in and I say, "See, you're dreaming. There's nobody else here." She says no. She went into the bathroom. So I opened the door and the light's still on. But there's nobody in there. Looking confused. I say, "What does she look like?" Because I thought someone was just messing around. It's too dark to tell. I could tell it's a woman, but she's so dark that I can't really make her face out. And when she says that, I get a little weirded out. I'll admit. But the night ends and eventually I forget about it. 3 months go by and I get pulled back down to the same unit. At some stage I have the same room as before, and this time a man in his earlies is the patient. Nice guy. Alert and oriented and very polite. Night's going good. It's about 3:00 and then his call. Like, goes off. Which means that he needs something. So I walk in and he says to me, "Excuse me. You're my nurse, right?" I shake my head. Yes, and then he says, "Well, why does that lady keep coming in here and standing in the corner? What is she doing?" I almost crapped myself instantly. This was 3 months later. Same room and same thing. I said to him, "Honestly, sir, I think it's a ghost." And he just laughs and I say, "You're not the first one to say that." After this, I started telling everyone about it. And then I found out that the entire second floor has a nurse. That's seen every once in a while. I heard that in the 1990s, a nurse who worked up there apparently shot herself on the second floor bathroom because allegedly she was stressed out and has some problems. So I was in a lonely and quite vulnerable time within my life. Back then I was looking for a good time and just wanted to be with someone. I was a bit shaken up for maybe a week after it happened. But I eventually got over it and I moved on with my life. So there was this young and really attractive dude, or so I thought, whose profile I came across. I was about 20 at the time. We spoke and we exchanged pics and messages. We planned to meet up and he gave me his address, and later in the day I took a Uber to that address. I was standing around for hours. It was really dark and was getting late in the night. I had previously knocked on the door of the address and then resorted to standing around near the address to see if I get a message or response or anything. But I didn't get anything. I sent him so many messages with no responses, and quite honestly, I was really disappointed. But I didn't give him trouble about it. I was more so disappointed about the wasted Uber money than I was with him, because it wasn't exactly the cheapest ride there. And back the next day. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. On the dating app that I was using, he sent me stories about something happening with someone in his family. I don't exactly remember it, but thinking back, I can't believe I actually believed him when he told me. I felt just so stupid. But that same day as we were talking, all was forgiven, and we just chalk it up to sometimes bad stuff happens, and we plan to meet up again at a much earlier time. This time I came to the same address, and as I'm knocking in the door, I don't get a response. And I look around. This time I see an old man sitting in a black car across the street from the house, and he's just kind of staring at me. The creepy thing. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Was that he was staring as if I was candy or something that he just couldn't resist, and he just had to have me. I waited around a bit longer. The old man is still there just staring at me, and I get a little bit uncomfortable and kind of worried too. And that was when it hit me. He was that young and really attractive dude that I'd been talking to this entire time. I didn't know what to do upon the realization. but I wasn't going to confront him or anything. I just remember being really angry, followed by sadness, and I got an UBA to go back. I blocked him on the app after sending him a nasty message. I don't know if he saw it or not before. I blocked him, but I didn't care. But he didn't stop there because he followed the U-Bed I was in. I kept a watchful eye out for his car and I was pretty damn terrified, but was relieved that he ended up losing us on the highway. I never did see him again after that, but I'll never forget the disgusting and snarky look that he had on his face, as he was kind of staring at me, just seemingly so proud of what he did. I couldn't think straight for a solid week after that. The wasted money, the emotional trauma, and just the pure anger. I learned an important lesson about being safer in dating apps after that, and teaching myself that sometimes we're just vulnerable and we shouldn't get so caught up in that. This happened in the summer of 2010, when I was just entering my teenage years, and my family took a trip to a really nice hotel in the city. I can't really remember why we decided to take the trip in the first place, but I remember a lot of family members coming with and staying in adjacent rooms. I've never asked my parents, and it's not really important to the story, but to preface, I'm a baby of a scaredy cat and always have been. I'm a pretty skinny, fragile kid, so I get spooked pretty easily even now. This, however, was almost definitely not me freaking myself out like I normally did. Looking back, I think I'm incredibly lucky that I trusted my instincts, so this hotel had a really strange design to it. The lobby was actually on the 4th floor and not the bottom floor, which I found strange. To access the lobby, you had to use the elevator. There was no way for you to get to it from the stairs, and this information would have been nice before everything happened. As you'll find out, the hotel was organized in a square shape. Every floor was lined with a balcony and you could look down into the lobby and the cafe area from your floor. Essentially, if you were walking to your room, you could be seen from anyone that was on your floor, if they just stepped out of their room and looked around. I always was afraid that I'd fall over this balcony and sail down 8 stories to my death, but they were high enough to a point where I wasn't a concern for my safety or anything. So the first day or two was nice, but my friends and I just hung out and played cards all day, and we watched whatever was on TV. At night we explored the halls of the hotel, each other ghost stories. All in all, it was actually a really fun time, even though I didn't fully understand why we were there. But on the 3rd day things just got pretty strange quickly, so I woke up to the sound of screaming coming from outside of my door. Now, because of the hotel's design that I mentioned, sounds from the lobby would echo all the way up to the top of the building. So when I walked outside to investigate, I immediately looked over the balcony to see what the commotion was about, and I saw a girl laying on the ground, eggs and milk splattered everywhere around her. People were rushing to help her, and I heard a couple of people telling each other to call 911. It seemed like the girl was unconscious. Maybe she'd passed out or something. I couldn't quite tell, but I scanned the lobby and saw that my family and a couple of my friends were in the lobby getting breakfast, all staring at the event in front of them. I decided that I'd rush down to meet them to find out what had happened. The elevator was on the opposite side of the floor, so I took the stairwell located right next to my room. We were on the 7th or the 8th floor, so I knew I only had to take about 4 flights down. I think not a big deal. I descended for a little while looking for the number 4 on the wall of the letter L. I passed 4, 5, ready to find a door to the lobby, and it took about 2 more flights of steps before realizing that there hadn't been a door for the 4th floor, nor had there been a door for the 3rd or the 2nd. Now at this point, I probably should have turned back, but I continued down because I was tired and didn't want to climb back up. There were some weird side hallways that went into the pitch black areas that a bunch of piping and wiring were at, and though I was curious to explore, I just kind of passed them by. I quickly hit the bottom floor, a dimly lit and cold room with cinder block walls and concrete floors. In front of me was a set of double doors. I hesitated at first, but I assumed that this was just another way back to the lobby, so I opened them and entered. Behind the door, this happened while I was in the 1st or 2nd year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. It was a massive warehouse-type room, probably the size of a small basketball stadium. The only light that came in was from the stairwell behind me, so I really wasn't able to see too much. But the stairs were stacked and covered in plastic wrap tables lined the wall, and in the distance I thought that I could see boxes stacked and lined against the wall as well. It was probably the storage room for the hotel, I reasoned. I looked around and saw an elevator in the back of the room, so I made my way towards it. I closed the door to the stairwell and began to walk in the dim light. But the room was super muggy and dusty, and it seemed like nobody had been down there in a really long time. As I got closer to the elevator, I noticed that it was a little bigger than the elevators in the lobby and the other. FLS might press the up button, but got no response. There was a card swiper next to the bottom. It must have been for the employees only. I thought I turned back towards the stairwell doors, making my way past the chairs and the tables along the wall. When I got to the door and I gave it a tug, and it was locked. Of course. But this is when things started to really hit me. I realized that I was stuck in the dark and dusty basement of a hotel. I didn't have a phone because my parents wouldn't let me get one until I graduated middle school, so I couldn't call anyone. Everyone likely assumed that I was still asleep in the room, so I began to freak out, believing that nobody was going to look for me. I searched around the warehouse, looking for other ways out, that some of the areas were better lit than others. So I looked around in those areas that I could see first before starting in the darker side of the rooms. There was one of the surf doors that I found, but it happened to be locked as well, and it was at this stage that I began to cry. I was scared that nobody would ever find me in this basement. I swear, too, that it felt like hours, but I think only a handful of minutes passed before I heard the door creak open. And it wasn't the door from the stairwell. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Rather, it was the second door that I'd found, and a slim, middle-aged man in a lab coat came out of the doors. Now, if this was 21-year-old me seeing this man, I would have been very confused as to why this guy was wearing a lab coat in a hotel. I was only 12 or 13 at the time. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, so I immediately was relieved at the sight of an adult who looked smart. So I approached him, tears on my eyes, and he immediately looked surprised to see me, as you'd expect. "Hey, what are you doing down here?" he yelled. "I got lost on my way down to the lobby and I've been locked in here. Do you have a key?" I was shaking, eager to get out of there. He didn't answer my question, and instead he said, "I know a way out of here. Follow me." He began to walk me towards the doors with the stairwell, and I followed, relieved that somebody had finally come to save me. We approached the doors and I began to reach for the handle, but he continued walking. "Hey, isn't it right here?" I asked him. I'll never forget the look in his face when I said that too, because he looked nervous, and though it was dim, I could see sweat glistening from his forehead and behind his glasses. "No, this way," he said sternly. I continued to follow him, but I was now nervous myself. He had passed the door to the stairs, and we were now headed toward an darker side of the basement, away from the elevators. He looked like he had no clue where he was leading me to, as he kept checking around him, almost as if he was taking in his surroundings for the first time. We turned a corner. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, and began walking towards the boxes, and it was a dead end. I immediately froze, realizing that something was very wrong. This guy had no idea where he was going, nor did he appear to work at the hotel. So I said, my voice shaking, "Okay, where are we going?" He turned and then said, "This way. Just follow me." I knew that there were no doors by these boxes. I had checked there first. After I found out, the stairwell door was locked, and I want to think Whatever God is up there for gifting me with the idea that I had. Next I started yelling as loud as I could. I yelled so loud, in fact, that I gave myself a headache after this. And the man, irritated, plugging his ears, began yelling back at me, "What are you doing? Be quiet." I continued to yell. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, and I don't even remember how long I was yelling for. But finally the man snapped and began to quickly walk towards me. I went in a full sprint towards the stairwell doors, hoping to God that they'd somehow be magically be open. He didn't run after me. He walked sternly behind me, muttering things like stupid and many other kind compliments. I was about 5 feet from the door when somebody burst through my savior, a hotel janitor, who just so happened to hear the screaming from the stairwell. He saw the situation, me and some random guy in a lab coat in a locked basement, and immediately told me to get behind him. The janitor asked me who the man was, and I said that I had no idea that he had come in through the door in the other side of the room, and I pointed to the door. The janitor quickly radioed into the desk that he had found a child in the basement, and quietly, so that I wouldn't hear, he said this man came from outside. Get security or something like that. The man in the lab coat started trying to argue with the janitor, claiming that he simply was looking for a bathroom. The janitor clearly wasn't buying it. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, and kept saying things like, "Oh yeah, wait till security gets here and you can talk to them about it." I was standing him the whole time, trying to take in what was happening, confused out of my mind. Eventually, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. An employee from the front desk arrived and took me back up the steps to the lobby, where I met with my family, who surprisingly had no idea that I was even missing. I told them the story, crying and shaking, and they hugged me tightly, thanking the employee over and over for their help. I never did get to thank that janitor. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside, which is a bit of a shame. Looking back now, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I had absolutely no clue what that man was doing in that basement. I don't have any information as to what happened afterwards or who he was. I know, for a fact, that the incident with the girl in the lobby was unrelated, something about low blood sugar. I'm not sure, but I thought about that day a lot, and the explanation that I can put together is that the door that I'd found in the basement led to the streets of the city, where he must have wandered in from or something. I have no clue what his intentions were, why he was wearing a lab coat of all things, or why he chose to pretend to know a way out like he did. To be frank, I suppose this could have just been a huge misunderstanding of some sort, and I just chose a really bad time to get lost. But all I know for sure is that if I hadn't have screamed my lungs out like I did, I may not have been telling the story the same way or even at all. Looking as a second grade teacher, it's not unusual to hear some of this off stuff, but after a while you just pretty much learn it to go with it. But throughout my career there was really only one student though that made me rethink teaching at one point. I won't use his real name for privacy reasons, obviously, so I'll just call him Billy. So Billy was just your average second grader. I never really had problems with him. Maybe he'd get up and wander around or shout out in class sometimes, but tons of students had little issues here and there like that. But then one day I noticed that he was acting a little different than usual. It was raining pretty heavy that day, and I recall it being pretty dark and gloomy. I had the class pair up in groups for a project, and that's when I saw Billy was still sitting at his table just drawing on some paper. I knew that he had friends in class, so it couldn't be that he to work with. So I stopped by his desk and told him that it was time to participate in our group project. Without even looking at me, he just said no thanks. I'm supposed to finish my drawing. I watched him draw for a moment, but honestly it didn't look like he was really creating anything. Just colored shapes and random doodling. So I told him that this wasn't part of any assignment today and he could finish it during his free time. But then he looked at me and said, well, my teacher said that I have to finish it right now. I was taken back a bit, not entirely sure what he was talking about. I looked around the class. All the other students were still pairing up. So I sat next to Billy and gently told him that I was his teacher. But I never said that he had to finish this drawing or anything. And almost instantly he replied back, saying that I wasn't his teacher anymore. Mr. Shadow was now as a teacher. I could have went along with this story, but I didn't want him to think that this idea was okay, especially in class. So I told him that there was no Mr. Shadow at this school. And then Billy looked at me in a way that I've never seen him look, almost as if he was scared and angry at the same time. Then he softly whispered to me, Mr. Shadow is real. The way he said it, he made it seem so real. Still looking at him, I asked him where Mr. Shadow was. He sunk down in his chair and his eyes moved towards the floor, and then he whispered out that he was standing behind you. In that moment, I honestly felt the hairs in the back of my neck raise up, but nothing could prepare me for what happened next. As I stood up from Billy's desk, I started to tell him that I didn't see him, Mr. Shadow. Then Billy quickly covered his eyes with his hands. That's when I noticed that the rest of the classroom was extremely quiet. So I turned around to face them, and all the other students were backed up against the chalkboard and they all looked terrified, as if they'd just seen a ghost. To this day, it's been the most unexplainable thing that I've ever seen. So one night, maybe almost a year ago now, I was waiting for my boyfriend outside of the liquor store. I was waiting in the car and it was pretty much dark outside. This girl comes up to the car and I hear her say, Angela. He caught me off guard as I couldn't really see her, so I don't know how she recognized me. But anyway, I opened the door slightly because, well, I thought maybe she was somebody that I knew. But when I did, I didn't recognize her at all. She made casual conversation with me. Small talk seemed fairly normal. I was very confused, obviously, but thought maybe it was someone that I met at a party that I just didn't remember. About a week later, I got a bunch of weird messages on Instagram, though they made no sense whatsoever. She sounded either tweaked out or like a paranoid, schizophrenic or something. I went to the profile and looked at the pic and it was that same girl. She was typing nonsense. I mean literal nonsense. Paranoid. Delusional thoughts that made no sense whatsoever. So I brushed it off because whatever, right? But I'll admit that I was still weirded out anyway. A few months later, I see her in line at my work. I have no idea how she knew where I worked. I mean, I work at a restaurant similar to Chipotle, and I was at the start of where people order and whatnot. And when she got to the front of the line, she said, hey, what time are you off? And I said later, and didn't give her an exact time. Obviously, she said okay to this and then just walked away. Didn't order anything or say anything else. So I knew then that she was there to see me. But once again, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I really don't know how she knew that I worked there. Because I mean, I don't put my work on social media or anything. After this encounter, this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. I went on my break to check my phone and I'd received an Instagram message from her. She was saying things like I was going to beat you up and all of this threatening, delusional stuff. I told my manager, and he said that he would walk me to my Uber at the end of the night, which he did. After this, I blocked the Instagram account. Didn't hear from her for a while, at least until a few months ago, when I saw in a police report from my city that she had been arrested for attempted murder. She had attempted to push the high school cross-country runners over a bridge. It's a bridge very close to my house. that I often cross while walking home from work, and it really freaked me out, since she had a slight obsession with me. I thought, wow, what if that had been me walking that bridge, since I take that route so much? Luckily, the kids fought her off and she was arrested and booked on attempted murder. I don't know how long she's going to be in, for this is California, and I don't know how much sentencing when it comes to stuff like that is. But anyway, she's in jail for now, and I sure hope that I don't see her in the future again. So I've never really told anyone this story, because, well, I don't think anyone's going to believe me. To be honest too, I don't even know if I believe myself. I was about 11 or 2002 and I came home from school at 2:30 and stayed alone until my parents got home from work a few hours later. My dad around for 30 and my mom about 6. On this particular afternoon, I came into the garage, walked around the corner to the foyer, where our stairs were to go up to my room. In the foyer we had this sort of cabinet thing that was really old and had a little shelf on the front of it. As I passed it, I noticed a pair of gloves sitting on the shelf, very heavy fur gloves that you'd imagine someone wearing in the winter in the 1800s, or something like gloves out of The Revenant. I'd never seen them before, obviously, in my life, and it was also summertime, so it just made no sense that they would be there. But then all of a sudden, I heard a distinct deep cough upstairs. I was paralyzed with fear. At this point I have no idea why I didn't run, as I just quietly sat and listened at the kitchen table. But I could hear footsteps of someone quite heavily walking around above me, and these were just sounds of the house settling. This definitely was someone walking around up there. Anyway, my logic at the time was that it was an intruder, and if I didn't put up a fight, they would just leave without hurting me. Once they came down and got their weird gloves, but I sat there for quite some time and no one ever came down. After what seemed like days, my dad gets home from work and I immediately tell him everything and they come look at the gloves and check upstairs, and to my disbelief, the gloves are just gone. My dad checks everywhere upstairs and there's nothing missing. No sign of anyone there and no sign of first entry anywhere. And my dad has always been extremely thorough about home security, so there's no way that there was an unlocked door or window. Basically, he thought that I was just making stuff up, and after that I just never mentioned it again. I've not had any other experiences like that ever since then, and I generally believe that most everything can be explained. The only thing I can think of for this happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. It was a dream, but I'm 99% sure that it wasn't. And when I asked my dad recently, he said that he remembers coming home to me freaking out about some gloves and a man upstairs. So it definitely happened. So my cousin and I left property and stumbled on a fire TFCK about an inch deep in some mud along the edge of a stream one day, just one. So we figured that it was a wheelbarrow. But the only thing was that there were no footprints to indicate that there was somebody pushing the wheelbarrow. We followed the fire, tracking it at us into what I can only describe as a kind of cul-de-sac of cliffs. The only way out was the way that we had to climb about 45 to 60 ft. The whole area was covered in mud and we found the wheelbarrow, but the only footprints were ours. There was also a ton of clothes around, which was weird, all of different sizes and styles. Everything ranging from kids' clothing to adult clothes, just kind of scattered everywhere. There were also a few dozen figurines, carved from stone around and some put together from tree bark. But these were the only things that seemed to be positioned with care. The clothes were scattered carelessly, but the figurines were standing upright, placed atop rocks or on fallen branches. In the side of one of the cliffs was a hole too small for us to fit in, and I was a pretty small kid at that age, and honestly we probably wouldn't have even noticed it, if not for the sound that came from it that caught our attention. It was like a hum, very short and followed by a click or a scratch sound. We shined our lights into the hole and saw that it must have been a 30 ft back into the cliffside. The outer layer of stone was reddish-brown, but the inside was gray, the same color as the stone figurines lying around. We weren't sure how far back the hole actually went, but we had the bright idea to throw one of the figurines into the hole and see if we could get it to hit the back. So we did. I tossed it in and my cousin shined his light and we watched it bounce to the back. But the second that it reached the very back, what I can only describe as like a curled arm, uncurled from some unseen crevice and snatched up the figurine and then just disappeared. We didn't see what it belonged to, but the color was like a bluish gray, and after it grabbed the figurine it didn't just pull back out of you. It kind of spiraled quickly. If I had to describe it, was kind of like a scorpion tail, but with a hand at the end instead of stinger. Later on, my cousin and I brought our uncle back to the place, kind of petrified. But when we did, all the clothes were gone. Everything except the wheelbarrow and the figurines had vanished and there was still no footprints. The hole still had a humming noise, occasionally coming out of it. So my uncle called the police and we ended up meeting with them back at the house and then bringing them to this place. They were still only our footprints, but now the figurines were facing the other way. This time my cousin has done the classic thing that kids do in movies. He taped a camcorder to a remote control car. The humming still came from the hole, but it became a rapid click as the officer and my uncle looked into the hole. We eventually convinced them to let us drive the remote control back into the back of the cave and see if we could record anything back there. The hole was actually so small that it was almost too tight to fit the RC car with the camera on top of it, but it was just doable. My cousin drove it to the back of the hole, turned it right, turned it left and then turned it around and drove it back. And we watched the footage and it goes in. It looks right and there's nothing. It turns left and dozens more figurines made of stone are in the back of the hole just around the corner, all of them facing directly at the car and arranged in perfect lines. But aside from that, there was nothing. No creepy creature with scorpion tail arms or anything. Just these figurines. The cops said that they would look more into it and let us know if they found anything worth telling us about. But the following morning my cousin and I woke up to one of the figurines sitting on the edge of his dresser next to his Nintendo 64. He swears that he didn't take one. So does my uncle. And I know that I didn't. So unless one of them's lying, it showed up on its own or it was placed there by whatever was in that hole. Well, working a large crafting store in California, and have been there for a year and 8 months now. And last year we hired a guy and his name is Hayden. Hayden was a little quiet on the first day but quickly became more talkative and over the next couple of weeks started to pretty much never stop talking. He would constantly say weird stuff and one day he was put in charge of the building furniture. Our store carries stuff like furniture and home decor and stuff like that. He was apparently having difficulty assembling the table that he was working on and said something about cutting his wrists if he can't figure out how to put it together another time. We were both working in the stockroom and he just kept talking about how much he looked like the Parkland shooter Nicholas Cruz. I'll admit that he did in fact look like that kid, which was really creepy. But I remember one day that I got enough work and was waiting for my ride to pick me up when, out of nowhere, Hayden just walked up behind me. He just stood there with an awkward smile on his face and I politely asked him what's up and he said something to the effect of "Oh, nothing much. Just enjoying my lunch break. I'm thinking about going inside Taco Bell, right across the parking lot from our work, and just shanking someone." He pretty much laughed at this and said that he was joking. But when my wife picked me up, we saw him walking towards the Taco Bell and just flashed us this creepy ass, ear-to-ear smile. So the last straw for me. This happened when I was in the first or second year of junior high school. I think I was about 13 years old. I grew up in the countryside. Was when he and I were assigned to work our spring freight and get it loaded up on a large EVO. Our shift started at 7:00 a.m. and was over at noon. It was 11 and we still hadn't finished our task, because Hayden just wouldn't stop goofing around. He would also work very slowly on purpose and would only take one item to the U-Boat at once. Our boss came to where we were working and was upset that we weren't done yet. He told us that we would both get written up if the job wasn't finished before we were off. And I was pissed off. At this point, and Hayden knew it, he seemed to feel bad for pretty much getting me into trouble and even apologized. But he then said something that really concerned me. he said in the most serious tone that I've ever heard him speak in since meeting him. "If I get fired, I'll shoot this place up." He went on to say that he knew all the emergency exits are and would first shoot up all the cashiers and then move on to the other employees in the store as well. I'll admit that I didn't immediately report what he said, but it definitely had me on edge and I kept thinking about what if. After some convincing from my wife, I finally did the right thing and I informed my manager. They took a written report from me and contacted the police, and after 2 more days of working with Hayden, he was eventually fired and subsequently arrested for his threats. The week after he got arrested, my boss held a meeting with the entire staff and told everyone what happened. After everyone left the meeting, he pulled me aside and revealed to me what the police and Hayden talked about during the interrogation. I don't completely remember what was said, but Hayden apparently admitted that he said what he said and kept asking if I had been the one who reported him. Fast forward to a few weeks ago and I was working at the same store, still am, and I was heading to the break room for my final break when I was to the left. My man was standing next to the paint case and asked if I could get him some paint. While I was opening the case, he addressed me by my name, which I immediately thought was weird because I wasn't wearing my name tag on this particular day. Out of curiosity, I asked him how he knew my name and he said that it was just a lucky guess, to which I thought that was BS, mainly because his tone of voice seemed sarcastic. The entire time I was getting his paint, he was just staring at me with a smirk on his face. He then began to ask me questions about my name, which is the same name of a popular TV show character. He asked what year I was born, why my parents decided to give me that name, etc. At this point I started to walk away, and, as I had other things to do and the whole time I was walking away, he was still trying to talk to me. I heard him yelling my name from 3 aisles down. I went and stood in the warehouse until I thought that it was gone, and later the same day, one of my co-workers asked me if I knew who was buying the paint, and I told her that I didn't. She told me that he had approached her and asked her all kinds of questions about me, like if I'm a good co-worker, if she likes me and stuff like that. This is an ongoing issue too. He's coming to the store to other times, one being yesterday during my day off, and apparently asked where I was. I don't know for sure, but I suspect that this guy might be cousins with Hayden, as that they sort of look alike in a similar manner too. Anyway, tonight, I worked the closing shift and was outside getting carts after the store closed at 8:00 p.m. Went to SU versus pulled into the parking lot. One of them parked behind the store and the other one parked in the main parking lot. I was standing in front of the entrance doors when a man dressed in all black and wearing a hood stepped out of one of the SU verses. Another guy walked up next to him and they both started approaching the store. I politely told them that we were closed, and when I looked down I noticed a large baseball bat in the hoodie guy's hand. I started repeatedly ringing the bell to be let back inside, and these 2 guys were just pacing back and forth in the lot, staring right at me. My manager eventually let me in and called the police as well, but the guys were obviously long gone by then. But I know that this could be a totally unrelated incident. More scares ahead. Subscribe today.